The morning came hot and silent across the valley, the kind of heat that pressed down on the land like a hand holding breath underwater. Dust hung in the air outside the Reverend Calloway's clapboard church, and flies circled the horse trough in lazy spirals. The doors stood open, but no hymn rose from inside. Only voices, low, tense, bargaining. Inside, a girl stood barefoot on the pine floor, her thin frame wrapped in a faded cotton dress 2 sizes too large. Her wrists were bound loosely with twine, not tight enough to cut, but enough to keep her from running. Her name was Nora. She was 13 years old, and she was being sold. Not as property, not openly, not legally. The Emancipation Proclamation had ended slavery 4 years prior, but in the scattered towns and hidden valleys of the Arizona Territory, where law arrived slow and justice rarely at all, there were still auctions, still exchanges, still men who found ways to wrap cruelty in contracts and call it commerce. Reverend Calloway stood beside her, one hand resting on her thin shoulder, his voice smooth as oil poured over tin. She's young, yes, but strong, good hands, obedient, no family left to come looking, clean bill of health. The marriage contract is legal under territorial provision, guardianship transfers upon signature. The dowry is $40, and she comes with the clothes on her back and a Bible. 3 men stood before them. One was a miner, thick-armed and reeking of whiskey. One was a cattle buyer from Tucson, his coat dusty and his eyes cold. The third was a rancher named Silas Kane. Silas was quiet, 42 years old, weathered by sun and work, with gray threading through his dark hair and lines carved deep around his eyes. He wore no gun on his hip, no badge on his chest. Just worn boots, a wide-brimmed hat, and the kind of stillness that came from a man who had learned long ago that words rarely fixed what silence couldn't hold. Nora did not look at any of them. Her gaze stayed fixed on the floor, her jaw tight, her breathing shallow. She had learned not to cry. Tears only made men feel more powerful. The miner grinned, stepping closer. $40 for a wife? Hell, I pay more than that for a mule. Reverend Calloway's smile didn't waver. Then you understand the value of a good investment. The miner reached out, his thick fingers brushing Nora's chin, tilting her face upward. She flinched, but the twine held her in place. Don't look there, she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, cracked with shame. Please, don't look there. But the miner did. He studied her face, her neck, the way her thin arms trembled. He smelled like sweat and tobacco and something sour. His grin widened. She'll do. The cattle buyer shook his head, uninterested. Too young. I need someone who can cook for a crew, not a child who'll cry herself to sleep every night. He turned and walked out, spurs jingling against the floor. That left 2. The miner pulled a leather pouch from his coat, counting coins slowly, deliberately, making a show of it. $40, and I'll take her now. Reverend Calloway's hand tightened on Nora's shoulder. The Lord smiles on a man who provides for the weak. Nora's breath hitched. Her fingers twisted against the twine. She wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but she had seen what happened to girls who fought. She had watched her older sister dragged from a wagon 2 years ago, kicking and screaming, and no one had lifted a hand to stop it. Then Silas spoke. 60. The word dropped into the room, like a stone into still water. The miner turned, eyes narrowing. What? Silas didn't repeat himself. He just pulled a small leather wallet from his coat pocket, unfolded 3 $20 bills, and laid them on the wooden pew beside him. His expression was unreadable. Reverend Calloway's eyes gleamed. $60, well, that is generous, Mr. Kane. The miner's jaw worked. You don't even know her. Why the hell would you pay more? Silas looked at him for a long moment. Then he said quietly, because I can. The miner spat on the floor and shoved past him, muttering curses under his breath. The door slammed behind him, and the church fell silent again. Reverend Calloway picked up the bills, folding them carefully into his Bible. A wise choice, Mr. Kane. The girl is yours. I'll draw up the contract. Silas didn't move. His gaze shifted to Nora, who still stood frozen, her eyes wide and glassy with fear. She looked like a deer caught in a snare, waiting for the knife. Untie her, Sealers said. Calloway hesitated. The contract. Untie her. The Reverend's smile faltered, but he nodded, stepping forward and loosening the twine around Nora's wrists. The moment her hands were free, she stumbled back, pressing herself against the wall, her chest heaving. Sealers took a step forward, slow and careful, the way a man approached a spooked horse. He crouched down so his eyes were level with hers. My name is Sealers, he said quietly. I have a ranch about 10 miles south of here. You don't have to be afraid. Nora stared at him, her lips trembling. You paid for me. I did. Then you own me. Sealers shook his head. No. Her brow furrowed, confusion flickering through the fear. But the Reverend said, I don't care what he said. Sealers's voice was steady, firm, but not unkind. I'm not taking you as a wife. I'm taking you out of here, that's all. Nora didn't move. She didn't believe him. Why would she? Every man who had ever claimed to help her had wanted something in return. Sealers stood slowly, stepping back to give her space. He picked up his hat from the pew and turned toward the door. There's a wagon outside. If you want to come with me, you can. If you don't, you can walk out that door right now, and I won't stop you. He walked out into the sunlight, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. Nora stood alone in the church, her heart pounding. She looked at Reverend Calloway, who was already tucking the money into his coat, his face smooth and indifferent. He didn't care where she went. He had what he wanted. She looked at the open door, at the blinding white light beyond it, at the man standing beside a dusty wagon waiting. She took one step, then another. And then she walked out into the heat. The ride south was silent. Nora sat on the wagon bench beside Sealers, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the rutted road ahead. The sun climbed higher, and the heat shimmered off the rocks in waves. Sealers didn't speak. He didn't ask her questions or try to comfort her. He just drove, steady and calm, like this was the most ordinary thing in the world. After an hour, they stopped near a shallow creek to rest the horses. Sealers climbed down, filled a canteen from the stream, and handed it to her without a word. Nora took it, drinking slowly, her throat dry and tight. Sealers crouched by the water, splashing his face and neck. He looked tired, older than he probably was, like he carried weight that didn't show on the outside. Why? Nora finally whispered. Sealers glanced up at her. Why what? Why did you do that? You don't know me. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, No, but I knew your father. Nora froze. The canteen slipped from her hands and hit the dirt. Sealers stood slowly, wiping his hands on his pants. William Harper, that was his name, wasn't it? Nora's chest tightened. She hadn't heard her father's name spoken aloud in over a year. How do you know that? Sealers's jaw worked. He looked away toward the horizon. I fought with him during the war. We were both at Glorietta Pass under Colonel Chivington. Your father saved my life when a Confederate sniper had me pinned behind a wagon. He pulled me out of the line of fire, took a bullet in the shoulder doing it. Nora's eyes widened. He never talked about the war. Most men don't. He died 3 years ago, Nora said, her voice breaking. Fever. My mother died a year later. I had a sister, but she was taken by men like the ones in that church. Sealers nodded slowly. I know. You know. He turned to face her, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes, guilt, raw, heavy guilt. I was there, Nora. Her breath caught. 2 years ago, Sealers continued, his voice low. I was driving cattle through your town. I saw your sister being dragged into a wagon. I saw you standing on the porch, screaming. I saw your mother trying to pull her back, and the man who hit her so hard she fell. Nora's hands began to shake. You saw that. I did. And you did nothing. Sealers didn't flinch. No, I didn't. The words hung in the air like smoke. Nora's voice cracked. Why? Because I was a coward. Sealers said it plainly, without defense. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I had cattle to move and a ranch to run, that getting involved would only get me killed and wouldn't change anything. He paused. I was wrong. Tears burned in Nora's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Do you think saying that makes it better? No. Do you think paying $60 fixes what you didn't do? No. Then why are you telling me this? Silas met her gaze, his expression steady. Because you deserve to know the truth, and because I can't undo what I didn't do, but I can do something now. Nora stared at him, anger and confusion warring in her chest. She wanted to scream at him, to hit him, to run, but she also saw something in his face that she hadn't seen in a long time: honesty. What happened to my sister? She whispered. Silas shook his head. I don't know, I tried to find out after, asked around, but she vanished. I'm sorry. Nora's knees buckled, and she sank down onto the creek bank, her hands pressing into the dirt. She wanted to hate him. It would be easier to hate him. But she was so tired. Silas crouched beside her, not touching, just close enough that she could feel his presence. I'm not asking you to or give me, I don't deserve that, but I'm offering you a place, a roof, work if you want it, and no one will touch you there, not while I'm breathing. Nora looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. You think that makes you a hero? No, Silas said quietly. It makes me someone trying to be less of a coward. She studied his face, the lines, the scars, the weariness. He wasn't lying. She could see that much. I'm still a child, she said, her voice breaking. I shouldn't have to decide who to trust. I should be playing in the dirt and climbing trees, not sitting here trying to figure out if you're going to hurt me. Silas nodded. You're right, you shouldn't. He stood, offering his hand. But if you come with me, I'll make sure you get to be a child again, even if it's just for a little while. Nora looked at his hand for a long time. Then, slowly, she took it. And Silas helped her to her feet. They climbed back into the wagon, and Silas snapped the reins. The horses moved forward, and the wheels creaked against the dirt. Nora didn't speak, but she didn't run either. Behind them, the dust rose in slow spirals, and the valley stretched wide and empty under the endless sky. They reached the ranch by late afternoon. It was modest, a single-story house built from timber and stone, a barn with a slanted roof, a corral holding 6 horses, and a few scattered chickens pecking at the dirt. The land around it was dry and wide, dotted with sagebrush and juniper trees. It wasn't much, but it was quiet, peaceful. Silas helped Nora down from the wagon. There's a spare room in the back. It's small, but it's clean. You can rest if you want. Nora nodded, still wary, still watching him like he might change at any moment. But she went inside, and Silas didn't follow. He just unhitched the horses and led them to the barn. For the first time in months, Nora closed a door and knew no one would open it without her permission. She sat on the narrow bed, her hands folded in her lap, and let herself breathe. 3 days passed. Silas gave her space. He didn't ask her to work, didn't ask her to cook or clean or do anything she didn't offer. He just let her be. In the mornings, he left bread and butter on the table. In the evenings, he ate quietly by the fire, sometimes reading, sometimes just staring into the flames. Nora watched him, studied him, waited for him to show his true self. But he didn't. On the 4th day, the riders came. Nora was outside, sitting on the porch steps, when she heard the hoofbeats. She looked up, her heart jumping into her throat. 4 men rode up the dusty path, their horses snorting and stamping. They wore dusty coats, wide-brimmed hats, and guns on their hips. The man in front was older, with a thick gray beard and a silver badge pinned to his chest. Sheriff Dalton. Nora's blood ran cold. She had seen him before, back in town, the day they buried her mother. He had stood at the edge of the graveyard, watching, his face hard and indifferent. Silas stepped out onto the porch, his hand resting on the doorframe. His expression was calm, but his body was tense. Sheriff, Silas said evenly. Dalton didn't dismount. He just sat there, looking down at Silas like a man who owned the world and everything in it. Heard you bought yourself a wife, Kane. Heard wrong. Dalton's eyes flicked to Nora, who shrank back against the porch railing. That the Harper girl. Sealers didn't answer. Reverend Calloway says you paid $60 for her, says you signed a contract. I paid $60 to get her out of that church, that's all. Dalton's smile was thin and cold. Contract says she's your legal ward. That means if you don't honor the marriage provision, she goes back into guardianship. And guess who the territory assigns guardianship to when there's no family? Sealers' jaw tightened. You. That's right, Dalton leaned forward in his saddle. So here's how this works. You either keep her under your roof as your wife, legal and proper, or I take her back to town and she gets reassigned. Probably to someone who'll actually use her the way she's meant to be used. Nora's breath came in short, shallow gasps. She wanted to run, to scream, but her legs wouldn't move. Sealers stepped down from the porch, slow and deliberate. He stopped a few feet from Dalton's horse, his hands loose at his sides. She's 13 years old. And Dalton's tone was mocking. Plenty of girls her age are married. It's legal under territorial provision. You know that. Legal doesn't make it right. Dalton laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. You think I care about right? I care about order. And order says that girl belongs under someone's control. If it's not yours, it's mine. One of the other riders, a younger man with a scar across his cheek, spoke up. Sheriff, maybe we just take her now, save the trip. Dalton held up a hand. Not yet. Let's give Mr. Kane a chance to think it over. He looked back at Sealers. You've got until Sue. End down tomorrow. Either you keep her legal or I come back with a warrant. Sealers didn't move, didn't speak. Dalton grinned. Smart man. He turned his horse and rode off, the other three following. Dust rose in their wake, and the sound of hoofbeats faded slowly into the distance. Sealers stood there for a long time, his fists clenched, his breathing slow and controlled. Nora finally found her voice. What are you going to do? Sealers turned to look at her. His face was hard, but his eyes were tired. I don't know yet. If you don't sign that paper, he'll take me. I know. And if you do sign it, her voice broke, then I'm trapped. Sealers walked back up onto the porch, sinking down onto the top step. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. Yeah. Nora sat down beside him, her arms wrapped around her knees. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Nora said, quietly, I don't want to go back. Sealers looked at her. You won't. How can you promise that? Because some things are worth standing for. His voice was steady, certain, and you're one of them. Nora's eyes strung with tears, but she didn't let them fall. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the valley. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out, its voice sharp and lonely against the wind. That night Nora couldn't sleep. She lay in the small bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Every creak of the house made her jump. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. She kept seeing Sheriff Dalton's face, his cold smile, the way he had looked at her like she was nothing. Finally, she got up and walked out into the main room. The fire had burned low, but Sealers was still awake, sitting in a chair by the hearth, staring into the embers. He looked up when she entered. Can't sleep. Nora shook her head. Sealers gestured to the chair across from him. Sit, if you want. She did, pulling her knees up to her chest, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Sealers said, I'm not going to sign that paper. Nora looked at him, her heart skipping, but then he'll. I know what he'll do. Sealers' voice was calm, but I'm not going to trap you in something you don't want, not for my safety, not for his orders. Then what will you do? Sealers was quiet for a moment, then he said, I'll fight. You can't fight the law. No, but I can fight men who hide behind it. Nora's throat tightened. You'll get killed. Maybe, Sealers looked at her, his expression serious. But I've spent too many years doing nothing, watching things happen and telling myself it wasn't my fight. I'm done with that. Nora's eyes filled with tears. I don't want you to die because of me. You're not the reason, Silas said quietly. I'm the reason. This is something I should have done a long time ago. He stood, walking over to a cabinet in the corner. He opened it and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a silver pocket watch, tarnished with age. He held it out to her. Your father gave this to me, the day he saved my life. He said, Silas, time's the one thing you can't get back, don't waste it. Nora took the watch, her hands trembling. She opened it, and inside was a faded photograph, a young man in a Union uniform, smiling. Her father. Tears spilled down her cheeks. He looked so happy. He was a good man, Silas said, better than I've been. Nora closed the watch carefully, holding it against her chest. Thank you. Silas nodded. He sat back down, and they stayed there in the quiet, the fire crackling softly between them. After a while, Nora said, If you're really going to fight, I want to help. Silas looked at her, surprised. Nora. I'm not helpless, she said, her voice stronger now. I've been treated like I am for too long, but I'm not. I can shoot. My father taught me, and I can ride. I'm small, but I'm fast. She met his gaze. If you're going to stand for something, then let me stand with you. Silas studied her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. All right. She managed a small, shaky smile. So let me ask you, if you were Silas, would you have signed that paper to keep her safe, or would you have refused and risked everything? Take a deep breath, pour yourself something warm, and think about that. If you're still with me, tell me what time it is where you are right now, and whether you think Sheriff Dalton is going to back down, or if this is about to get a whole lot worse. The next morning, Silas and Nora worked side by side. He showed her how to load the rifle, how to steady her breath before pulling the trigger. She remembered more than she thought she would. Muscle memory from years ago, before the world had taken everything from her. They didn't talk much, but there was an understanding between them now, a quiet trust. And when the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Silas looked at her and said, Whatever happens, you stay behind me. Understand? Nora nodded. But she didn't plan on hiding. Sheriff Dalton arrived just before sunset, as promised, but this time he wasn't alone. 8 men rode with him, hired guns, ranch hands loyal to the old ways, men who believed power came from fear. They spread out in a loose line in front of Silas's house, their hands resting on their holsters. Silas stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. Nora stood just inside the doorway, her own rifle gripped tight. Dalton grinned. Well, Kane, time's up. You got that paper signed. No. Dalton's grin faded. Then the girl comes with me. No, Silas said again. She doesn't. Dalton's hand moved toward his gun. You really want to die over this? If that's what it takes. The hired guns shifted, fingers twitching. Tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. And then, from the ridge behind the house, a voice called out. Dalton! Everyone turned. A line of riders appeared along the ridge, 12 men, maybe more. They weren't soldiers. They weren't lawmen. They were ranchers, farmers, men Silas had worked beside for years, men who had heard what was happening and decided they weren't going to stand by and watch. One of them, an older man named Hank, rode forward slowly. I've known you since you pinned that badge on, Dalton, and I've watched you twist the law to suit yourself for too long. Another man, younger, added, You want the girl, you go through all of us. Dalton's face went red. You're interfering with territorial law. Law, Hank laughed bitterly. You call this law, selling children, threatening a man for doing the right thing? He shook his head. No, this ends today. Dalton looked around, his confidence cracking. His hired guns were outnumbered now, outmatched. He pointed at Silas. This isn't over. Yeah, Silas said quietly, it is. Dalton spat into the dirt, jerked his horse around, and rode off. His men followed, their faces dark with frustration. The valley fell silent. Hank rode down to the house, dismounting with a groan. He clapped Silas on the shoulder. "You're a damn fool, Kane." Silas smiled faintly. "Probably. But you're a good fool." Hank looked at Nora, tipping his hat. "You're safe now, girl. Dalton won't come back, not after this." Nora's eyes filled with tears, and this time she let them fall. Days turned into weeks. Nora stayed. She mended clothes, helped with the horses, planted seeds in a small garden by the house. Slowly, carefully, she began to heal. Silas kept his promise. He never treated her as anything but a child under his care. He gave her space, gave her time, and never asked for anything in return. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Nora said, "I think my father would have liked you." Silas smiled. "I hope so." "Thank you," she said quietly, "for standing." Silas nodded. "Thank you for letting me." Years later, people in the valley would still tell the story of the rancher who refused to sign the paper, who stood against a corrupt sheriff and won, not with a gun, but with a community that decided enough was enough. And Nora Harper, who had once been sold in a church, grew up strong, free, and unafraid. She kept her father's watch on a chain around her neck, a reminder of what silence cost, and what courage could win. The sun dipped lower, painting the valley in gold and shadow. Dust rose around their feet, and in the quiet, something like peace settled over the land.